Hi, my name is Dr. Dara Rampersad of Blue Pass First Responder Services. I work as a first responder and forensic psychologist. Today, I wanted to chat with you about the effects that COVID-19 are having on the family members of first responders, medical professionals, and emergency essential workers. This video is brought to you by the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona, Brain Health Resource Center. So let's get into a discussion a little bit about what stress is and how we could learn about the symptoms of stress that we're experiencing so we can reduce our stress output as we have a lot of media input that's making us anxious. So we have essentially two types of stress. We have eustress, which is good stress, and we have distress, which is bad stress. Oftentimes, when we are faced with both, we have a tendency to overlook good stress and attribute all of our feelings just to bad stress. But as many of you have probably experienced during this period of time, we also have good stress that we're experiencing. Some of that might entail a double-edged sword of working from home, plus having to take care of your kids and be a teacher and a parent and a spouse or a loved one at the same time. That adds complicated layers of stress because it adds positive stress and bad stress. People express these in different ways, where you might see historically first responders who are in the community or at hospital settings may have symptoms of stress that are leading them to be reclusive or to isolate themselves. When things get stressful, they isolate themselves. Or when things get stressful, they become angry. The family members of first responders oftentimes know the signs and the cues to pay attention to, and they themselves would withdraw and not try to engage the first responder. Now, how has the COVID-19 virus really affected the way that we work as a family unit? Well, I would say drastically, because we have a lot more responsibilities now and role miscibility that is mixed functions of what we are all doing. So whereas you might have a first responder that might work, let's say on a fire shift that was 24 on, 72 off, or 48 on, 96 off, in that period of time that firefighter is now off, they are having to do a lot more different activities than they did before, while having their spouse who may be working from home in their space when they weren't accustomed to it before. Plus, they are taking care of children or of parents and or family members or people who are ill, and their empathy when they're at home to try to take care of their loved ones may be decreased because their frustration is higher. We need to be able to pay attention to some of those key stresses that we experience as well as the symptoms that we have so we can try to eliminate those responses from causing anger, arguments with our loved ones. So let's continue on talking about stress a bit. We have critical incident stress, which is a response, which is a typical normal response to an abnormal situation. This happens when things are out of our control, but we perceive that we may be at grave risk of death or dismemberment, or somebody that we love might actually be affected gravely from it. In this particular circumstance with COVID-19, you can see how this plays out, where we have this ubiquitous, invisible virus that people are afraid of contracting in general public. And we are rolling on these calls, or we're receiving these calls at our hospital facilities, and we don't really have control who we are going to go to assist, as well as we are unaware of the fact of if they have a contagiousness factor, or even if they've been exposed. And for the medical professional receiving that person at the hospital, from the triage or even the security officer who greets that person outside and brings them into the facility, they too are trying to utilize the best that they can PPEs to protect themselves. The downside is that we have a real paucity of availability of PPEs to be able to protect our staff. So many facilities are going to a place where they can reuse PPEs. And this probably has some first responders a little bit weirded out about that process because of contamination or cross-contamination. For the first responder, that I'm hearing from most of my first responders is an underwhelming alarm to this particular virus. Many first responders are thinking to themselves, well, I roll on a lot more serious calls than this virus would present. In fact, on a day-to-day basis, I'm probably more afraid of contracting HIV from a stick on a needle in somebody's pocket than I am trying to contract COVID-19. And this underwhelming response or under-response to COVID-19 sometimes puts families in danger because the first responder, even though they may be fastidiously washing their hands at work, they may have more lapsed habits or laxed habits than they would typically have when they're responding to a person who is known to have an illness. That is the whole crux of this, is that when you get called out to a scene, you have no clue sometimes if somebody is infected or not, or contaminated or not. When somebody is being received at hospital settings, similar outcomes occur. What I'm hearing from people in the hospital setting is that the nurses and the doctors are conscious of the fact that they have a risk of contraction of COVID-19, but at the same time, it's not consuming them to the extent that they are paranoid about it. This actually is a protective factor. If you think about it, it is not very beneficial to us to have an over-response to all types of illnesses that we come into contact with. And if we were to have that over-response to all types of illnesses that come in, you will have a bunch of neurotic people roaming around in the community. And we can see here just from this little experiment that we've had to undergo forcefully over the past month, that social isolation breeds a lot more anxiety, and then people also become very fed up with it, and they are seeking out, as social beings, and as they should, to try to make contact with other people. The downside of it is if we are not taking the appropriate barriers of distance between each other, because we know that person is a familiar family member, extended family member, or friend, or neighbor. And it is imperative for us to make sure that we are trying to flatten that curve, as you've heard in the media and in science by WHO, to make sure that we are trying to reduce the rate of infection and hopefully eliminate the virus. People express stress in so many different ways, and what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is some of these critical incident stress responses that people experience. I'll start by talking about some of these typical physical symptoms that people are experiencing. Nausea, tremors, chills, diarrhea, rapid heart rate, muscle aches, dry mouth, shaking, visual problems, fatigue. Some of these physical dumping that people experience, physical dumping issues that people experience, are really a response where your adrenaline has spiked and now you're going to experience an adrenaline dump. And over chronic stress, you notice that this may not actually be where it is high and then drops all the way down to that dump, but you have just chronic types of physical ailments and illnesses like headaches and stomach aches. And those are probably two of the most common that people experience. They also experience chest tightness and muscle tightness, and they end up from this getting a headache, a radiant headache. And most times people are reporting these types of symptoms, muscle tension. You also have emotional symptoms. On the emotional symptoms side of things, what I've noticed is more of a bereavement grief model that people are experiencing. I'm seeing that people are in shock, and then subsequently they're also in denial, and they're in disbelief, and they're thinking, well, it could never happen to me, so why would I even care about it? Or I am young enough and I'm resilient enough that even if I did get sick, it's only going to be a flu. I prefer to be able to get the flu and not have to worry about all of the stress that people are going through. Then we have anger, that people are angry, that people are mass panicking. And we also have this sort of bargaining that's going on. Well, if I do get it, maybe I might be able to prevent the spread to my family, And if they get it, maybe I might be able to not get that exact same virus from them. And maybe it's just a cold. Maybe I don't actually have the flu. And so they start to bargain within themselves, all the while trying to get towards this level of acceptance that they do need to get to in order to realize that this is a pandemic and we've gone through this unprecedented experience together as a society. And this is a global society. It's not just a national society. And so there must be something more to this when we have never experienced anything like this before, that it has brought us to our knees financially and economically, as well as punched out some serious holes that we are experiencing as far as shortages of supplies for emergency responders to do their jobs. Attached to this, family members might also experience things that they're grieving for the safety of their loved ones who are putting their lives on the line in the field or at a hospital. And these might be things where you're starting to have more anxiety, and that anxiety could take a form of physical anxiety, or it could actually just be anxiety where you feel sometimes that there's an elephant standing on your chest towards getting a panic attack, or you think that you might have shortness of breath and it's very difficult to breathe for a while and you start to get a little bit more panicked. You might have fear that your loved one who is in the field or at the hospital might contract the illness, and then what would that mean for you and your kids at home? So what I've seen and heard from people in this particular respect is that the first responder is at the hospital or in the field and they're coming home and they are relegated to a separate bedroom where they're sleeping, and they are choosing to self-isolate from their family. The hard part of this is that families oftentimes provide the emotional support that the first responder needs to be able to self-regulate or re-regulate to get back to work. And some first responders are wondering to themselves, well, who's going to take care of me emotionally? Because I'm like a physical isolation that nobody really cares about anymore. And I don't have emotional support, I don't have physical support, and I'm doing things independently. Plus, I'm trying to save lives every single day out in the community. And so they are starting to feel numb. And from that numbness resonates some frustration, which then leads to anger. And obviously then towards sometimes into depression. Behavioral changes. You may notice behavioral changes such as changes in activity. Well, that has been forced upon us, and if you have been following the guidelines that we've been set, we haven't been out and about unless it was for essential purposes that we needed to be out. And people are now connecting via FaceTime and other mediums to try to connect with their loved ones and with their friends so they can fulfill that social category that they need so badly. Withdrawal and suspiciousness. You'll find that people, when they go into the community, if you have to make a run to a supermarket or to a convenience store, you are starting to feel more anxiousness as you get out there and suspicious of everybody, that everybody is sick. I know I've seen it myself when I've been out to get supplies. And I've seen people who are shifting their eyes and almost like if they're afraid to say good morning or good afternoon because they're afraid that it'll be contacted through words. So people are over-responding to this where they are very paranoid about the spread of this illness just by even common courtesies or smiling. We'll see changes in communication patterns as well as changes in interpersonal sorts of distances between each other. Changes in interpersonal patterns. Well, in communication patterns, people are shorter than usual, and they're not trying to talk too much about COVID besides just what they are doing to be able to prepare themselves. But nobody's really getting into a deep conversation about what it would be like to contract the illness and what it would be like for them if they were to contract it and what they would do. Unusual behavior, excessive silence, increased smoking or alcohol consumption. These are all behavioral things that people do to be able to cope. It is not uncommon that you've seen or heard someone that has gone to a grocery store or a liquor store to buy copious amounts of alcohol. And whereas you had some people who were panic buying toilet paper and other products, you had some people who were just trying to supply themselves with alcohol and cigarettes, because that's all they felt like they needed to get through this stressful period of time. Cognitive issues. We also have things related to confusion and inability to pay attention. And unfortunately, we also have people who are stimulating themselves by looking at television programs or internet feeds or news feeds, and they're not giving themselves defined periods of time to watch coverage of the COVID-19 virus and then pull away. And we saw this exact same sort of behavior when we have big events such as 9/11. People, myself as well, we were glued to the television in total disbelief of what was going on in terms of numbers of deaths and how people were dying. And similarly, these exact same types of behaviors are presenting themselves again. Difficulty doing concentration tasks. Our brain is now preoccupied with all of the stress that we have. Our frontal lobe starts to get decreased in terms of functioning, to pay attention, to concentrate, to reason, to have logic. All of those typical things that we need our frontal lobe for. And then we also have inhibition, of course, which is important when you want to inhibit yourself from doing a panic sort of response. As we progress through stress, we have typical stress responses that I spoke with you about, and we also have something called acute stress disorder. Acute stress disorder typically happens within a month of the stressor ending, and it can last for up to 1 month beyond that stress when it's ended. After that, it gets converted to something called post-traumatic stress disorder, which you guys may be familiar with. Let's talk a little bit about some of these symptoms, because the brain processes this in a way that is logical, that is trying to make sense of some of these stressful experiences that we have. So cognitive reactions. People have this disbelief, confusion, hopelessness, and helplessness. Affective or emotional responses: sorrow, anxiety, guilt, anger, loneliness. Physiological issues that people may have: this fatigue or loss of appetite or sleep disturbances. And behaviorally, people may have social withdrawal, restlessness, crying, nightmares, and if somebody died, obviously survivor's guilt and maybe even bereavement or grief issues that are concurrently taking place. So in the grief model, we try to pay attention to the fact that grief is not a linear process. What we do have is that grief actually takes a topsy-turvy sort of approach to trying to resolve itself or to resolve itself. And if we classically look at some of the symptoms of denial, anger, bargaining, grief, and acceptance, this epidemic and pandemic that we are in right now with COVID-19 has put us into a grief process, into this grief cycle. Well, what is the downside of this? Well, what I've been doing for quite some time, as well as other professionals across the country, have been looking at suicide rates of first responders. And we know that documented-wise, we probably document only a quarter to a half of total completed suicides, and probably even less of the attempted suicides. When people are responding to people in plight or in need, generally this can have an effect on somebody's psyche, where they start to become depressed as the depressed population they roll on. In a way, it's a parallel process that the person is experiencing, but they're unaware of the fact that they're experiencing that or doing those behaviors. In a pandemic situation like this, we run a risk of suicide rates spiking in our first responders. And last year, we had a verified 228 suicides or completed suicides by law enforcement personnel. We had about 169 confirmed firefighter EMT deaths. And then now we see that already within this year that rates have been climbing and probably will end up surpassing where we were last year. in pandemic situations, you may not find that people are experiencing these right in the moment of the pandemic, but there could be a tail wave effect as the pandemic ends, and that would be because of the stresses that have caught up to that person. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about the risk of suicide, and suicide as it pertains to means. Generally, men choose firearms as a first line of means to kill themselves, and secondly would be hanging, and men and women choose hanging about equally. And then we have women choosing more often pills to die by suicide. So what that means is, as we stockpile ammunition and we stockpile guns in our homes to try to protect ourselves from this anxiety that we have, we also have more means and access to be able to kill ourselves. And this is really important to pay attention to, because access, unfortunately, leads to the outcome when you have a suicidal thought and behavior and intent and means and plans to be able to do that. So some typical signs of suicide, and one of the main things that I think you should pay attention to, is somebody's perceived risk of burdensomeness. How much of a burden does this person feel on you or on the system or on your family members? Because if they feel like they have no purpose and there is no hope and they feel worthless and they feel like a burden, and then they have an intent and a plan and a means to be able to execute that plan, that makes somebody a very high risk of suicide. We want to pay particular attention to other issues like guilt and shame and isolation, depression, talks of suicide, and people who are having that as a narrative in their life. Alienation and withdrawal lead to those feelings of depression that people experience. Worthlessness and fatigue, lack of interest in activities that people usually would engage in. I've heard from a vast majority of first responders that they have been feeling sad to depressed of the fact that all of the gyms have closed in the community, and now they're trying to find alternate ways of exercise to be able to release that frustration from their daily jobs. And as you can imagine, if coping resources like that are taken away, it would lead to a lot more strain in relationships that they have at home. And as a result, you would find more arguments, and then you would find more domestic violence calls, which is exactly what's happening in the community right now. Domestic violence calls have skyrocketed. And that's because we have a number of people who aren't accustomed to living with each other full time, always around each other, and being in each other's space. It starts to create friction, which creates arguments, which creates, unfortunately, alcohol consumption, etc., which decreases judgment and leads to some of these issues of domestic violence. So let us try to figure out a plan. If somebody is talking about suicide or they have suicidal intent, means, plans, etc., I would like to invite each of you guys to be honest with yourself and see if it is something that you could secure those weapons temporarily. And it could be at a friend's house or gun club or somebody that you trust. Just so you could get over the hump of that depression and suicidal thought and intent to be able to give yourself a shot at life. Use time to be able to connect with people. Now we have more time than usual, and it is a nice time for us to make contact with our loved ones and to connect with people who maybe we've lost contact with over the years, just to do a check-in with them and to let them know that you're thinking about them. We do need those kinds of things to be able to feed our soul, if you will. And we have a number of places that you can get help from. One of the places that you could contact if you're in crisis, a family member or loved one or a first responder themselves, is the Maricopa County Crisis Line. And that actually covers many more counties than just Maricopa County. And the phone number for that is 602-222-9444. You also have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 800 273-TALK, which is 8255. For first responders and their family members, you can contact me, Dr. Dara, at Blue Paz at 602-345-1425 or at www.bluepaz.com. You also have Safe Call Now, which is 206-459-3020. We have a line for veterans, which is 866-4AZ-VETS. That's 429-8387. We have Survive First, which is 844-577-7233. We have Bulletproof for cops and family members, and that's 602-433-2677. And I'll also give you Firestrong, which is 844-525-3473. We will try to make these slides available along with a host of other resources that people who are going through crisis can get help and hopefully find that support that they need to get through this difficult time of COVID-19. Remember to go easy on yourselves. Parents, if you have kids at home, your kid is probably doing homeschooling and you are probably feeling guilty because you don't have adequate time to be a full-time teacher as well as parent, loved one, and try to take care of your own life as well. With your responsibilities. Just know that everybody is sharing a similar experience and that you're not alone and that everything is going to work out fine. Just reassure yourself that everything is going to work out fine. Your kid will catch up. They are resilient, and I know that you're doing the best that you can do. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. Take care of yourself and try to do some things that actually feed your psyche or your soul as much as you can, whether that is taking an hour to yourself a day or trying to take half an hour or 15 minutes, and whether that includes meditation or jogging somewhere or doing push-ups, whatever you can do to try to increase your physical activity and try to decrease your stress. This is going to help you through a lot of these periods of acute stress. And also, I also wanted to say that within relationships, if you can increase communication so that way you and your partner are on the same page, that's going to go a very long way for getting through these hurdles of stress. I know that me and my wife, we do that, and we take time to talk, and we also take time to flirt, and we take time to smile, and we are doing the best that we can as well with every other family. So best of luck, stay safe, and I will hopefully be in touch with you guys again in the future. Thank you.